Hey, look, it's April 26th. This is a regular class, and you'll see me mocking children making poor choices. Monday, we have the test over the entire book, not the last chapters, the entire book, because I figure by this point we've read the entire book. Also on Monday, you have a choice on tests. You're going to have a basic test that you can choose to do, which is all multiple choice, really easy for guessing, but you cannot get higher than a 75% on there. I'm aiming that for my kids who did not read the book and are just trying to wing it. And then you have the challenge test, which is much more challenging and requires thought, but you can get over 100% and fun stuff like that. You get to choose which test you want, and again, there will be test corrections for the 4 kids who choose to do it. And then that will be Monday. And then, let's see, today we're going to talk about the end of the book, book drive, honor society, normal best. Oh yeah, I guess if you're at home, it doesn't really matter to you because you're not here for best anyway. And then tie game was cars, because I like my car stunts. Now to you guys and talking about the end with outsiders, because I think we had just gotten to Johnny dying.
Yeah.
Dally. And Dally. No, not Dally.
Did we talk about, I don't think we talked about this with you guys. On with Johnny, realize when he dies, it's not necessarily from his injuries. Because his injuries are not completely life-threatening. He broke his back and he got burned, but by itself, that's not enough to kill you. There's something else that causes Johnny to die.
Depression.
Actually, yeah, you're right. It was the idea of depression. Have you ever seen it in movies when someone's in the hospital and they get hurt? People are like, live, fight, you can do it. And they're yelling at the person. They're like, that guy's like, I can. And they try to pull through. Just the opposite happens with Johnny. Johnny doesn't want to pull through. Because if Johnny survives, he has to go back home, live in a house while he's crippled with parents who yell at him and beat him. He's like, why do I want to get better? To go back home. Why would I want to go to that home? Oh, wait, I don't. And so instead of fighting to get better, he just sort of goes, and dies. And so he just sort of gives in, and basically it comes down to depression.
Does he pull the plug? He's like, come on.
He sort of pulls his own plug mentally.
Yeah, he's not like a life support.
And we got to Ponyboy walking home with you guys.
Yeah.
And the creepy guy that turned out to not be as creepy, who then takes him home. And what does Ponyboy do in his car the whole way home?
Lean on his seat.
Lean on his chair and stuff like that. And then let's see, from there we get to him getting to the house. There we go. If we get to him getting to the house and he has to break to everyone, hey, bad news.
Johnny Cakes died.
Yeah. Remember our friend Johnny? They're like, what do you mean remember? And he's like, well, he's not alive anymore. Just like it's really hard to do your homework without having your iPad open to the questions so that you can look at them to write them down. He says, all low-key, try not to yell at a kid. You can't tape your quiz in. You have to do the questions. Ooh! Which we can go ahead and cover right here. I'll put it on the video to help you guys out. I am changing things for next year inspired by this class. So next year, I'm changing my homework. There are 2 parts that are changing on homework, which I'm going to give you guys credit for next year.
Thank you.
One is going to be called the new or green clause. And here's how the or green clause works. Starting next week with our next homework assignment. If you choose option 4, in order to do option 4, you have to have the roll of tape with you on your desk, and you have to have your name written on the roll of tape with a marker. This way it's going to prevent any more people borrowing tape from other people. So you cannot have, because she's the only one that's ever made that choice. Every kid that goes over to Mrs. Randall, right. So as I said, we're now changing things. So moving forward, you have to have your own roll of tape with your name written on it for you to be able to do it. But what if I tape it in at home? Then you bring your tape in with you. What if I can't? Then you get a 0 and it doesn't count. For you to do option 4, you have to have the roll of tape right there with you. Also, starting next week, if you turn it in late, you can only do option 1. As soon as you turn it in late, you can no longer do option 2, which is the letters, or option 3. You have to always do option 1. So that we're now changing, moving forward with all the homeworks. Next year, I'll give you guys credit for inspiring the change. That's it. It's just option 4. You have to have the tape with you. And if you turn it in late, for the most part, those of you who do your work, it's not a change to you whatsoever. It's basically just a change for the irresponsible kids.
Well, if we do both option 1 and option 4, but we don't have the tape with us.
Then you don't get to do it.
Then you just
it's just like me saying, what if I want to buy a Lamborghini, but I don't have the money? They don't give you the Lamborghini. So, yeah. So those of you who don't have tape, guess who now speaks broke? Y'alls. So hopefully that helps you out. So that'll be the change moving forward. Hey, now back to here talking about
The Oregon claws.
No,
green
call it the
claws.
or yellow.
Or
Or yellow feet. They don't even know who you are, though.
They won't. I'm not going to use your first names. And for all I know, they'll be just random kids. I'll just say it's one kid named Orgreen. For me, it'll help me remember the kids. And honestly, the reason it came from it,
Or and green.
That's gonna be last week.
Because-
Cole has done it so many times.
Exactly. You gotta call it.
right,
And I did.
Deja, why are you going after Cole?
one,
She's not even allowed to
that's
talk.
why it's inspired this. I think the change is due. Two is because, honestly, it was two kids I like, because I like you and I like Green. And the fact that you guys got caught up in this, I figure if I make the change, that way you no longer have that temptation. So that's why I ended up doing it, because I know it's been a problem. I just couldn't figure out what it was. What's that?
Is it gonna be this year too that you're gonna do that? Like the rest of this year?
No,
Yes,
we did
starting
that.
with
We
the
had
next
4 weeks of
homework.
school. I'm just not gonna give you more A+.
We only have 2 homework assignments left for me, so it shouldn't be a major issue. So that's it.
How many weeks of school left?
Like 4.
Let's see.
Starting Monday.
Moving on to this. So we now have the fact that Pony Boy is at home. He said Johnny died. Now we just talked about for some of you guys dying on the inside. We're going to go from there. Oh, Dally. Dally then calls them, because Dally apparently then made a poor choice.
And he robbed the store.
He goes and robs it. What does he use to rob the store?
His heater.
And what do we know about this heater?
It's not loaded.
The fact that he used an unloaded heater. Now, the problem is no one else knows it's unloaded. And then he goes and robs the store, immediately calls all of the other greasers. Well, not all the greasers, just the 5 that were there. He's like, hey, come meet me. Where does he want them to meet him?
A lot.
In the empty lot. And so he goes, hey, meet me in the empty lot. I just robbed his store. I need you to come see me. They're like, all right, we're coming. And they come to show up there. What time of day is it?
Night.
Now, with this scene, it's a little bit confusing with what happens here. So you have Dally comes running into the empty lot. When he comes running into the empty lot, he could stop anywhere in this entire area. But there's specifically one area he stops.
Under a light.
Directly underneath the lamppost, which plays a big role in what's coming up. So he runs into the empty lot, goes directly under the lamppost, and of course, who's following him?
The police.
The popos, because you know how they are after you go and rob a place. So the popos then show up and following him along. He has his unloaded heater in his hand, and then when they pull up, they all get out, and then Dally does the whole, pew pew, I'm shooting at you, hee hee hee. And he does the whole, I'm fake shooting, and pulls a gun. Unfortunately, police officers do not have a good sense of humor when you're pointing a gun at them, and so they point their guns back at him. He pretends to shoot, they pretend to shoot, but their pretending is better than his pretending, and they drop him down.
Dally kicked. I thought he committed suicide.
Broviac, doesn't he realize his gun is unloaded? Yes, he's well aware of the fact that his
He
gun
wants
is
to
unloaded.
die because of.
He did not want to scare them.
He just wanted to die.
He wanted to die. This is Dally's
Johnny
way
was the only
of committing suicide. Now, why does Dally want to commit suicide?
He lost Johnny, and Johnny's the only one
And so Johnny was the only thing he cared about. When it says he loved Johnny, it just means the fact that Johnny was the closest thing to a family member that he had. Because his parents were awful. You thought Johnny's were bad. They don't mention much about Dally's, but it's the same thing. And so basically the only kid he's ever, the only person, human he's cared about, just died. So for Dally, he's like, why keep on going when the only reason I was living was Johnny, and Johnny's dead? The problem is, Dally's a tough thug. And as a tough thug, he can't just commit suicide. He has to keep his reputation even after he dies. And the best way to keep his reputation
He's robbing the store.
is going out in the coolest way possible. And so what is the coolest way for a thug to die?
Double
Getting shot by the
backflip.
Getting, eventually Watt's going to have to start charging you points, and just so you know you don't have points, just giving you a heads up, is getting shot by the police. And so that's how he comes up with this plan to get shot by the police. But the thing,
Mr. Brovicast, if he knew that's going to happen, why make his friends show up?
and that's the issue. When he calls the other guys, he knows what he's going to do. This is all planned out. Because he robbed the store with the empty gun, says, come meet me at the empty lot. Why not just show up there by himself? He makes his friends watch this happen, which is a really awful thing to do. Until you realize what his thinking is. For Dally, he's a guy. Guys are not good with emotions. He's trying to find a way to say goodbye to his friends so they understand why he did this. He wants his friends to know it was not because I was robbing a store and I made a poor choice. It was because of Johnny. So that's why he does not call like Tim Shepard or the Brumley boys or all those other thugs, he calls the other kids that are close to him and makes them come watch it. And that's his way of letting them know, hey, I'm doing this because of Johnny, and I want you to know about it.
Zoom.
Wait, why did he go under the lamppost then?
Good question. Why go into the lamppost?
So
So they
see
can see
him.
him.
Who could see him?
Friends.
Not just see him, but
John.
they wanted to make sure he could see the weapon. So with the police officers, this only because if he's in the dark, and they're like,
We can't tell. Is that a gun?
we're not really. So he's underneath the light. He's like, it's a gun. Can you see my gun? I'm pointing it at you. And so it makes it much easier that way. So that's this whole thinking for it.
Imagine
So
if
that
it
way he
was-
makes sure that he
That's
sees.
kind of sad.
Imagine if like it was loaded and like he shot 3 shots and like.
Yeah, that's his goal. Is he has no intention of hurting the police officers. He just wants to not be around anymore. And then that's when his friends come running in and they're like, "Oh my goodness!" The problem with this, what the problem is, what happens to Ponyboy right after this scene?
He gets,
Both
he,
ways.
like, passes
He
out.
faints.
Passes out and hits the ground. Wakes up in the hospital.
No,
Realize,
he doesn't
with
really.
all of this, he is in the hospital and his brain is completely messed up, which then makes chapter 11 kind of confusing when he
Yes.
babbles there off and on. All of this has happened to Ponyboy in a 1-week time period. It started on a Thursday night at the very beginning of the book when he got jumped by a bunch of Socs on his way home. So realize what all occurred to him. Thursday night, jumped by a bunch of Socs, almost killed, knife held to his throat, gets saved by a bunch of his friends. The next day goes out to a movie theater, meets some really hot girls, flirts with really hot girls, walks home with really hot girls, gets stopped by their boyfriends, almost gets in a fight, has to pull out a sharp bottle, almost stab them, then gets taken, falls asleep in the empty lot, goes home, gets slapped by his brother, runs away from home, and at home he goes over to the park. At the park he gets jumped by a bunch of Socs, almost killed by a bunch of Socs, almost drowned by a bunch of Socs, wakes up from those Socs, finds out his best friend just killed somebody, runs away that night, spends the next week living in a church all by himself, eating nothing but bologna and chocolate and cigarettes. At the end of that, goes out to Dairy Queen. From the Dairy Queen, from the Dairy Queen, goes from there, goes back to the church. From the church, he ends up seeing the giant fire, runs inside of the fire, saves people, ends up catching on fire, gets knocked out by Dally, wakes up from there, goes to the Rumble that same night. In that Rumble, gets kicked in the head, gets a concussion, gets beat up, goes to the hospital. The hospital watches best friend die. And then from the best friend die, goes home, walks home, gets picked up by a random stranger. From there, tells his brothers, hey, guess what? Johnny's dead. Goes out and finds Dally, sees Dally get shot down in front of him, killed by the police. All of that happens in the course of 7 days. Any one of those things for any one of you would be enough to go, ooh, I had a big week. But all of that happens in 1 week. That's more than his brain can handle. So his brain just goes, beep, and shuts down. And hits the ground, he passes out. When he wakes up, his brain does not want to accept everything that's happened to him. And so you get to the part where Randy shows up, which was Bob's friend. And he and Randy get into this argument going back and forth. Did that one. There you go. The sickness is basically him being depressed and his brain trying to recuperate from all this. Because your brain can only take so much trauma. So his brain sort of goes into a small coma where it just sort of shuts down and tries to let things pass. When he wakes up, he realizes on some level that all this has happened, but he does not want to accept it. So he has to find a happier way of looking at things. So his happier way of looking at things is convincing himself that his best friend is still alive. And his best friend is... But if his best friend is still alive, Bob is still dead. So the only way to make his life happier is he says, all right, let's convince myself that Johnny's still alive, Bob's dead, but I don't want Johnny to be a murderer because that means he's dead. So
Make it down.
Good morning, teachers.
they're sending kids down, none of you guys.
I need the following students to
None of
report
you.
to the
So
LGI.
in order to convince himself, the only other person that could have killed Bob is who?
Delaney Ryder.
Ponyboy himself. So his happy place is convincing himself.
You need to have your iPad and headphones only. Place
Oh,
all
she
other
was in the
items in
email.
your lockers, including cell phones and smart watches. Again, Sadie Edwards, Jake Sands,
6
Delaney
kids.
Ryder, Lane Humes, and Zachary Penn. Please report to the LGI. Thank you.
Thank you. So he convinces himself that he killed Bob, Johnny is still alive. Problem is, he didn't kill Bob. It's not a good point in your life when your happy place is convincing yourself that you're a murderer. And that's what Ponyboy does. He's like,
My life is so awful. I wish things were better. I wish I was a murderer. If I was a murderer, then things would be better.
because if he had killed Bob, then Johnny would still be alive. And that's when he gets in this weird argument with Randy, when Randy's like, you didn't kill him. He's like, yes, I did. Randy's like, I was there, man. You were getting drowned. And so he gets that weird conversation, that argument back and forth. Then Ponyboy has to go to court, which becomes another confusing bit, because the reason why Ponyboy goes to court is not why he thinks he's going to court. Why does he think he's going to court?
Because of the murder.
He figures he's going to court because he killed Bob. He's like, all right, I'm prepared for this. I killed Bob. I'm just going to go ahead and admit to things. I'll go to jail for it. I did all these awful things. That's not why he's in court. Did you pick up why he's in court? So really, he's not in court. Derry's going to court. And they're trying to figure out if Derry is a good parent for him. Because the whole reason Derry gets to have the boys there is as long as no one gets in trouble with the police. He got in trouble with the police. Being involved in a murder charge is getting in trouble with the police. So the police are planning on taking both Soda Pop and Ponyboy away from Derry. So they bring everyone in to find out, hey, is Derry still being a good parent to you? So all the questions they keep asking are, hey, how is Derry treating you? Do you get along with Derry? How are things at home? And he's like, what about when I stabbed Bob? And they're like, no. And so that's why he gets confused in that part. And of course, the Socias come in and give credit to the Socias. They step up and go, hey, we were drunk. We started the fight. It was us. You really can't blame the greasers on this one. Yeah, Bob got stabbed, but we were in the process of killing his friend. And so the Socias, although they can be jerks, were actually decent people in court and stepped up and admitted to all of these different things. And at the end of it, we find out, hey, they get to stay together. And the court says, no, not Derry's fault. Everything is good. Except for Ponyboy. After he gets out of court, he goes back to school.
Oh, and everyone hates him.
And, well, back and forth. He definitely has a hard time there.
Yeah.
But it's not so much that everybody hates Ponyboy as much as Ponyboy hates Ponyboy. And Ponyboy's really depressed, as you can imagine. His best friend died. He watched a guy get shot in front of him. He watched another kid get killed. And so it's a lot for a person to go through. So Ponyboy basically goes through depression. That whole mental health thing that we're aware of now. But back then, he basically stops doing school. The thing that a lot of kids do, when you go through home life trauma and kids go through divorce and have upsetting things, school becomes a thing you don't care about. Same thing happens to Ponyboy. He was a straight-A student, and then all of a sudden, all this stuff happens in his life. And he's like, oh, school? I don't care about it anymore. Why don't I just drop out because I'm done with all of this? Problem is, his brother doesn't want him to drop out. Soda Pop doesn't want him to drop out, and they all try to stop him. And it becomes this whole big fight where they yell at each other. And his teacher gives him one last thing. His teacher goes, listen, you're going to be failing my class. And if in high school, when you fail a class, then you have to repeat that whole class over again. He's like, we'll give you one last thing you can do to pass my class. And they call it a theme, which is essentially old-timey words for just writing an essay. What was this essay supposed to be about?
What happened?
Something important. An event that was important to you in your life. Something you did that meant a lot to you. And he's like, well, I could talk about going to the zoo as a kid. That was kind of important. And he's trying to figure out what this important thing is. And if he can write a good one, he does not fail his English class. And then he realizes there is an important thing that has happened to him. And what is the important thing that's happened to him? Johnny dying and this whole thing with Bob. And so he calls his teacher in the middle of the night. Not a thing I recommend you guys doing. Although I guess with Remind, that's kind of close because you guys do send me messages in the middle of the night. But he contacts his teacher and goes, hey, how long does that essay have to be? And the teacher's like, you can make it as long as you want to. He's like, I just want to make sure I get whatever it is you're trying to tell me. And I'm going to read that last page because that's where he gets the last part. Page 179 is where he calls his English teacher and it goes from there. He goes, hey, Mr. Syme, this is Ponyboy. That essay, how long can it be? Why, not any less than 5 pages. He sounded a little surprised. I'd forgotten it was late at night. But can it be longer? Yeah, certainly, Ponyboy. It can be as long as you want it to be. Thanks, I said, hung up. I sat down, picked up my pen, and thought for a minute, remembering a handsome dark boy with a reckless grin and a hot temper. Do you know which boy that is?
Johnny.
No.
Callie. Derry.
Bob. That one's Bob. A tough, tow-headed, which means blonde boy, with a cigarette in his mouth and a bitter grin on his hard face.
No.
Nope.
Himself.
Nope. Dally. Nicely done.
I'm so confused.
Remembering, and this time it didn't hurt, a quiet, defeated-looking 16-year-old whose hair needed cutting badly and who had black eyes with a frightened expression to them. Had to be
Oh,
Johnny.
he's talking about all three guys. That
All three boys that died. 1 week had taken all 3 of them. And I decided I could tell people, beginning with my English teacher. I wondered for a long time how to start that theme, how to start writing about something that was important to me. And I finally began like this. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only 2 things in my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. That is a line that you've seen before.
The first line of the book. Wait, that's the beginning of the book.
The very beginning of the book, chapter 1, which is why I talk about Paul Newman and show you pictures of Paul Newman to try and help that stick in your head when we get to the very end. So when he has to write his essay, what essay does he write?
The book.
And that's where this book comes in. So when he says, how long can it be? He says, as long as you want it to be. So this becomes the essay that Ponyboy writes. And so, yes and no. With the whole thing with Ponyboy, is it a true story? No. Actually, S.E. Hinton's a girl. Susan Hinton. And with it, it technically is a true story because she wrote it when she was 16 years old. And she wrote it because she got into a fight with her English teacher. And she kept telling her English teacher that every book you give us to read is crap. And he said, well, if you think the books I give you are crap, Susan, why don't you write a better book? So she did. And so she wrote a book based on her friends. And what happened in her town at the time, she basically wrote the character Cherry about herself. And the fact that she had these 2 groups of friends. She was that in-between kid who was friends with both the really popular kids and the really poor kids. And she kept watching her friends get into all these fights and all these bad things kept happening. And she tried to convince her friends, if you keep doing this, eventually one of you is going to die. And they're like, whatever. And so she decided to write a book about her friends where the things she warned them about actually happened. So she based all of these characters on her friends that she had at school that day. And then she ended up writing this book, and it became the classic book that we see here with The Outsiders. And so technically, it's not a true story, but it is based on the events based around her, and she wrote it about her life. So,
Wait, did the church fall on someone?
no, that part was more make-believe. It was more the Greasers and Socias did exist, and the different characters there were all based on her actual friends. But none of her friends had actually killed each other. But the beating each other up and jumping each other, that was happening. And that was what she saw going on that kind of scared her, where she was trying to find a way to stop it. I'll skip that one for now.
No.
Oh, actually, no, I do want to say it. Page 179, I do want to hit because there is one part about like that. Because that is, with 171, is when he is, after the Rumble and all that stuff, and he's sitting there, and all of a sudden he's hanging out with 2-Bit, and a bunch of Socias pull up. Let's see. I was sitting on the fender of Steve's car, smoking and drinking a Pepsi, while he and 2-Bit were inside talking to some girls, when a car drove up, and 3 Socias got out. I just sat there, looked at them, and took another swallow of the Pepsi. I wasn't scared. It was the oddest feeling in the world. I didn't feel anything. Scared, mad, anything. Just zero. Hey, you're the guy that killed Bob Sheldon, one of them said. He was a friend of ours. We don't like nobody killing our friends, especially greasers. Big deal. I busted the end off my bottle, held onto the neck, tossed away my cigarette. You get back into your car, or you'll get split. They kind of looked surprised, and one of them backed up. I mean it! I hopped off the car. I've had about all I can take from you guys! I started toward them, holding the bottle the way Tim Shepard holds a switchblade, out and away from myself in a loose but firm hold. I guess they knew I meant business, because they got into their car and drove off. Who is he becoming there? He's absolutely becoming Dally. The whole thing where he starts to give up on everything. He's like, you know what? When everybody around you dies and gets hurt, the easiest way to deal with it is you give up and stop caring. So he starts becoming Dally. You really would have used that bottle, wouldn't you? 2-Bit had been watching from the store doorway. Steve and me were backing you, but I guess we didn't need to. You'd have really cut them up, huh? Yeah, I guess so, I said with a sigh. I didn't see what 2-Bit was sweating about. Anyone else could have done the same thing, and 2-Bit wouldn't have thought about it twice. Hey, Ponyboy, listen. Don't get tough. You're not like the rest of us. Don't try to be. What was the matter with 2-Bit? I knew as well as he did that if you got tough, you didn't get hurt. You get smart and nothing can touch you. What in the world are you doing? 2-Bit's voice broke into my thoughts. I looked up at him. I'm picking up the pieces of glass. He stared at me for a second, then grinned. You little son of a gun, he said in a relieved voice. I didn't know what he was talking about, so I just went on picking up the glass from the bottle, put it in a trash can. I didn't want anyone to get in a flat tire. That in part is what makes me smile. Even though he's trying to become Dally, in his heart, he's still Pony Boy. And the idea that he smashed a bottle was going to cut them, but he's like, well, I mean, you can't leave the pieces of bottle there. Someone could get hurt. So he goes and starts picking up all the pieces of bottle and then starting to throw them away. Ooh, I did forget one other question for you. The thing that keeps him from turning into Dally. He gets the letter from Johnny, and about when he gets the old book in there. And what was the letter from Johnny that told him?
Stay gold.
There you go. And that was the letter from Pony Boy from Johnny that says, "Hey, stay gold. Make sure you talk to Dally, because I don't think Dally realizes it, and I don't want you to turn out like Dally." And that's when Pony Boy was like, "Oh, snap! That's exactly what I'm doing." Because he realizes he's trying to give up on everything, and if you get hard and stop caring, it solves your problems, but it ends up making you a really miserable and unhappy person. And I think, there we go, Johnny's final letter is on page 178, and there we go, to go at the very end. That pretty much covers the whole book. The last thing I'm going to do with you guys this year is we're going to read the sequel to this, which is That Was Then, This Is Now. It is a shorter book. It is also a more adult book, which we're going to get to in coming up.
Like the seller?
Sort of like that, although it does a different kind of adulting, but we'll talk about that with The Outsiders is aimed more at kids your age, and I think younger kids could read it. The next book is aimed more at you guys than up towards high school, but it's going to lead to conversations we have coming up.
We just need to read the seller.